The moment you think your world is safe is the very moment it begins to fall apart. Emily. If you are still watching my video, kindly subscribe to the channel. I always believed I had found the love of my life in Daniel. He was charming, attentive, and had the kind of smile that could make you feel as though nothing bad in the world could ever touch you. We had been engaged for 6 months, and every single day I thought about our future together, our wedding, our children, and the life we were going to build. I trusted him with every part of my soul, and that trust became my downfall. It started on a quiet Sunday evening. We had invited a couple of friends over earlier in the day, and after they left, Daniel seemed unusually distracted. He was fidgeting with his phone, constantly checking notifications, his laughter a little too forced when I asked him what was so funny. I didn't think much of it then. Love makes you blind, and I was too in love to notice the cracks forming. That night, after dinner, I decided to take a shower. I had been recording a voice note for my best friend earlier, telling her about the dinner party, and I forgot to stop the recording. I left my phone on the couch without a second thought. I didn't realize it was still recording when I walked away. The sound of the shower drowned out the world, and I was humming softly, unaware of what was unraveling in the living room. When I came back, Daniel was on the phone, smiling in that secretive way I had begun to notice more often. He hung up quickly when he saw me, and I brushed it off again, convincing myself he was planning something sweet for our wedding. I didn't check my phone until later that night when I curled up in bed and tapped the screen. That's when I saw the recording still running. I was curious. I pressed play. At first, it was silence and the muffled sound of the shower. Then, Daniel's voice filled the room. My stomach clenched. He was talking to someone, no, not just someone, a woman. His voice was low, intimate, filled with warmth I had always believed was mine alone. She has no idea, he said, and then he laughed. Emily thinks I'm the perfect fiancé. But you and I, we know the truth. This wedding is just a stepping stone. She has money, connections, everything I need. Once the vows are said, I'll have it all. And you, well, you'll always be the one I come back to. The blood drained from my face. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. He kept talking, confessing things I wish I could unhear. He described me as naive, gullible, too blinded by love to notice the lies he was feeding me. He promised this other woman, Claire, that once he secured the financial benefits of marrying me, he'd make sure she remained his true partner. He even joked about how I would probably never suspect a thing because I was too innocent. Innocent. That word cut me deeper than anything else. I sat there, staring at the wall, my phone still in my hand, the recording echoing through the room. Tears stung my eyes, but beneath the heartbreak, another feeling began to grow: rage. Pure, burning rage. I wanted to confront him right then, to scream, to throw the phone in his face and demand answers. But something inside me stopped. A voice whispered, "Don't show your cards yet. Let him think you're still in the dark." I knew what I had to do. For the next few days, I acted as though nothing had changed. I smiled, laughed, kissed him goodnight, and let him believe I was still his oblivious little bride-to-be. Inside, I was crumbling, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. At night, when he slept, I stared at the ceiling and replayed his words in my head. Every lie, every betrayal, every secret whispered to Claire became fuel for the fire building inside me. I started digging. I remembered the name Claire from the recording, so I searched. Social media made it easy. There she was, blonde hair, bright smile, the kind of woman who oozed confidence. Her profile was full of pictures, some of them with Daniel, cleverly hidden among group shots or framed in ways that made it look innocent. But I saw the way his hand brushed her arm, the way she leaned into him. I knew. I created a fake account and started following her quietly. That's when the real story unfolded. Claire had no idea I existed. She thought she was the one Daniel was building a life with. He had told her I was just a business connection, someone who could help him get ahead, someone he had to charm and impress for the sake of his career. The audacity left me trembling with fury. He was playing us both, using me for money and her for pleasure. And in both cases, he thought he was the smartest man in the room. But he had underestimated me. The more I uncovered, the stronger my resolve grew. I wasn't just going to walk away, I was going to make him regret ever thinking he could outsmart me. I wanted him to feel the humiliation, the betrayal, the shattering pain he had inflicted on me. And I wanted to take away the very things he craved most: control, money, and power. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Daniel wrapped his arm around me and whispered about our future. I forced a smile, my heart pounding with suppressed fury. In that moment, I decided exactly how I would destroy him. Step 1 was gathering evidence. I saved the recording, made copies, and even backed it up on cloud storage. Then I collected every suspicious message, every photo, every breadcrumb that tied him to Claire. Piece by piece, I built a case so solid that no denial could ever dismantle it. Step 2 is patience. I knew I couldn't rush. If I confronted him too soon, he'd manipulate the story, twist it until I looked paranoid or insecure. I had to wait for the perfect moment. And that moment was closer than he thought. One night, Daniel came home late. His shirt smelled faintly of perfume, not mine. He kissed my cheek, unaware that I was silently counting the days until his empire of lies crumbled. I lay in bed, wide awake, planning my next move. My heart ached, but my mind was sharp. I thought about the wedding invitations sitting neatly in a box, about the dress hanging in my closet, about the dreams he had already poisoned. I thought about Claire, another victim of his games, and how she too deserved to know the truth. I whispered into the darkness, a promise to myself. He thinks he's the hunter, but I'll be the one who finishes the game. Little did Daniel know, the clock was already ticking on his downfall. And as I drifted off to sleep, the fire of revenge burned hotter than ever. I tucked the promise under my skin like a living thing and let it beat there until it became part of me. The next morning, I moved like a woman with a plan, but the smile I wore was carefully crafted to look naive, trusting, and hopelessly in love. Daniel still believed he had me exactly where he wanted me. He didn't know how thoroughly I'd already mapped his life, or how patiently I'd been waiting for him to step into the light so I could close the trap. First, I planted seeds of doubt where they would grow fastest, among the people who mattered to him. I started with his job. Daniel had always held his position at the investment firm like a badge of honor. He'd told me often how indispensable he was, how many people relied on his integrity. I knew that for him, reputation was everything. If that could be damaged, the rest would unravel. I'd been careful, meticulous, really collecting screenshots, timestamps, the recording itself, copies of messages that showed conversations between him and Claire, and the little lies he told in emails and texts that contradicted what he told his colleagues about his career and his prospects. I composed an anonymous email to the head of his department. It was clinical, detached. I didn't want to sound emotional. I attached a folder labeled Evidence, the recording file renamed something innocuous, and a short line: "You deserve to know what your senior associate is doing behind closed doors." I pressed send and then watched my inbox like a hawk, though I knew I wouldn't be getting a reply. The world I had been living in for years, my plans, my heart, our life, had been a lie, and I was going to dismantle it piece by piece. At the same time, I reached out to Claire. I could have left her in the dark and enjoyed Daniel's unraveling from afar, but I kept thinking about the way he'd spoken of her, the way he'd positioned each of us in his story as pawns for his advantage. Claire deserved the truth. I created a careful, guarded message from a new account. I told her some facts and offered to meet in a public place. When she responded, her words were raw and tangled with disbelief. She agreed to meet at a cafe I picked because it was full of windows and easy to escape from if necessary. When Claire arrived, she was nothing like the confident, glossy images on her profile. Her face carried the exhaustion of someone who had been waiting for a life that felt inevitable but had never quite fit. She sat across from me with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was an anchor. "You're Emily," she said, as if it confirmed something. Her voice was brittle. "I saw Daniel's name with you." I thought. "I found out the same way you did," I said, and for the first time I let my voice tremble. "I didn't want you to be a secret he kept. He's been lying to both of us in different ways." He's using me for stability and money, and he's using you for something else, attention, affection, whatever you want to call it. But he planned this. He told someone he was marrying me for advantage, and he told me he loved me. Her face crumpled. For a long time we just sat there, two women stitched together by the same thread of betrayal. Then something remarkable happened. Instead of sparring, we formed a quick, quiet alliance. Claire's anger was sharp and personal in a way my pain had never allowed itself to be, and that rawness sharpened my strategy. She told me things he'd said to her about the house, the future, how he imagined our lives like chess pieces. She gave me access to messages I hadn't been able to find, and in return I gave her copies of proof and the file containing his voice. We planned not to destroy him with theatrics, but to expose his actions where they would hurt most, where his lies were the foundation of other people's trust in him. We crafted a timeline of evidence, then fed it to the right people. The email to his boss had already sparked interest. HR got in touch moments after, a terse reply that they were investigating. Daniel, for all his charm, ran on confidence. Under that thin veneer of control, he was panicked. I watched him from a distance for a few days, basking in the small, delicious sting of seeing his composure fray. Next came the wedding. He assumed it would be the moment he finally locked everything in. He had chosen the venue, argued over flowers, and plotted guest lists as if success was measured by how many respectable names he could produce. He paged through bridal magazines with me, nodded approvingly as I modeled veils and smiled at ring settings, all the while laying plans that excluded any real love for me. I had to use the wedding, yes, it was audacious, to finish him. But I also wanted to do it in a way that felt like justice, not spectacle. There would be no screaming, no slashed gowns, just a slow, precise unmasking that let everyone he had deceived see the truth. On the morning of the rehearsal dinner, I made my move. I quietly gave a USB drive, labeled with a business-like file name, to the caterer's manager, a woman who had no reason to suspect anything and an excellent memory for faces. I asked her to place the drive in the event coordinator's office folder labeled Media. It contained the recording, the emails, and screenshots, cleanly organized with dates and brief captions. I watched the drive move into the system and felt my pulse steady. The message would be impossible to ignore once it hit the hands of anyone in charge. It would be inconvenient for them. The venue had a reputation to protect, but reputations are brittle things when the truth comes knocking. That evening, as guests trickled in for the rehearsal dinner, the first ripple became a wave. An HR representative from Daniel's firm arrived unannounced, then another, people who had once toasted to his career now wearing the same polite grimace I'd seen on the face of a judge in a courtroom. A board table conversation around us splintered into suspicious glances. I watched Daniel move through the room in a state of increasing confusion. His laughter faltered, his jokes fell flat, and he repeated our rehearsed lines as if the sound would cement them into reality. Later, when we were alone for a brief moment in the hallway, he tried to take my hand. His fingers were damp with sweat. "Babe, what's going on?" he asked. I let my smile be soft. "Perhaps you should ask your boss. Or maybe ask Claire." I said Claire's name like a bell that could not be unrung. Panic is a poor mask for years of arrogance. He flailed, making small, ridiculous denials. "What are you talking about? Who did this? This is sabotage." He tried to turn his polished charm on those around him, but people had already seen the documents on the drive. Calls were being made. His colleagues whispered behind their hands. Someone from the firm pulled him aside and spoke to him in a tone I recognized as legal, careful, clipped, final. By nightfall, the first official email hit my inbox. Daniel was suspended pending an investigation. Word spread, quiet and merciless. The guests left with brittle smiles and hushed speculation. We were meant to celebrate, but instead we watched a man's life begin to rattle under the weight of his misdeeds. He came home that night like a man defeated even before a verdict. He lashed out at me first, a wild, ugly thing, accusations, blame, practiced lines about sabotage and enemies. But he was too tired to be convincing. His voice would break and his eyes would slide away when he saw mine. He tried to suggest I'd done it to ruin him. Why would you do this? He hissed. We were supposed to. We were supposed to be honest, I said simply. You chose otherwise. The next days were a blend of quiet proceedings and careful public dismantling. The firm called for meetings. They put out statements that were neutral but lethal in how they framed uncertainty. News outlets sniffed around. Someone had leaked snippets to a blogger who loved scandal, and there it was, Daniel's name paired with words he'd never wanted associated with it: deceit, betrayal, impropriety. My phone filled with messages, some from friends, some from strangers. Some were cruel, others polite. I steeled myself and deleted the ones that were poison. Daniel's lawyer called, demanding a face-to-face. He wanted to settle, to buy silence, or so he thought. Litigation, legal fees, and public scandal were his natural defenses. He underestimated one thing, though: I was beyond bargaining. Money had never quelled the ache of personal treachery, and no amount of hush money would rebuild our evenings, our shared dreams, or the future he had lied about. Claire and I had another plan. Being merely reactive wasn't enough. We wanted him accountable, and we wanted assurance that he could never stitch this back together into another smooth lie. We pursued civil avenues, a restraining order, partly symbolic, partly practical, and a demand for transparency about finances. I hired a lawyer who specialized in marital fraud cases. She looked at our documentation and nodded with that exact expression people have in courtroom dramas when the pieces finally align. She told me aloud what I already knew: we had enough to ruin him professionally and to keep him from pretending our story had a happy ending. Then came the day of the ultimatum. Daniel had expected me to be broken, to beg for reconciliation, to be the one making apologies. When I arrived at his office, the air smelled like recycled coffee and stress. The receptionist glanced at me with professional curiosity. Daniel sat behind his desk, trying to look imperious. He tried to play indifference, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed him. I want a divorce, I said. I want full disclosure of your business dealings and a permanent injunction that prevents you from contacting Claire. I want a fair division of our assets. What you took from me, you will have to give back. I'm not here for theatrics, Daniel. I'm here for what's fair. He laughed, a tight sound. You think you can do this? I know I can, I said. I have everything you said to Claire, the recording, the emails. I have people who will testify to the timeline. You can fight it, or you can make this easier on yourself. He chose to fight. Men like Daniel rarely admitted defeat gracefully. He assembled a team of lawyers, delivered statements to the press insisting he was the victim of a smear, and tried to paint me as unstable. But the thing about the truth is that it accumulates weight. It doesn't need to be loud to be heavy. People began to connect the dots. Connections he'd tried to gloss over became undeniable. Court days are strange. Sterile rooms, the low hum of air conditioning, the clicking pens of people who will decide the contour of your future in black and white. I sat there through depositions where Daniel's charm was stripped down to nervous twitching. Under oath, his statements often contradicted each other, and those contradictions were hammer blows. We called witnesses who had seen him with Claire, colleagues who testified about suspicious financial transfers, and the caterer who confirmed the USB drive. The recording itself, played in a closed hearing, shrank him to a man whose deceit could be heard plainly in his own voice. When the final ruling came, it wasn't the dramatic headline I'd imagined, but it was decisive. He was forced to relinquish certain assets, was publicly censured by his professional association, and barred from holding the kind of fiduciary role he'd once bragged about. The injunction stayed, the divorce finalized. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like someone who had regained a piece of herself she never thought she would find. But the most potent moment was more intimate than legal victory. A week after the final ruling, Claire and I met again at the same cafe where we'd first aligned our paths. We didn't need to revisit details. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a shared wound that had healed into a scar we now wore like a map. We toasted with tea, no champagne, no constellations of future promises, and agreed, quietly, to reclaim the narratives he had stolen from us. We exchanged contact information not as conspirators, but as allies. My revenge had not been about theatrical destruction. I didn't relish humiliation for the sake of cruelty. I wanted correction. I wanted him to live with the consequences of the life he had designed at the expense of other people's trust. I wanted the people who had once admired him to question their assumptions. He lost his standing, his leverage, and, most importantly, the comfortable certainty that his manipulations would go unnoticed. There is a cold comfort in watching someone who cast themselves as invincible realize how fallible they really were. After the dust settled, my life reassembled itself in new patterns. There were simple pleasures I'd neglected for the sake of a relationship that had demanded my center. I took a long week-long trip with my sister to the coast where the salt air seemed to scrub old regrets from my skin. I returned and found work I loved. I reconnected with friends who had been waiting in the wings when I was too broken to answer. I learned to sleep without a pillow of anxiety under my head. I allowed myself small, deliberate joys, the smell of coffee in the morning, a book read without an anxious eye toward a phone, a walk where I didn't think about how to trap someone else. Sometimes, late at night, anger would return like a tide, sharp, cold, insistent. I would let it wash over me, accept it, and then watch it recede. There were moments of unexpected tenderness as well. Once I found a note Daniel had left on the kitchen counter months before, folded into a shape that looked like a promise. I put it in the trash without reading it. Some possessions I returned, some I sold, and some I kept as evidence that I had once been brave enough to love and wise enough to leave. People asked me if revenge felt like victory. The honest answer is complicated. Victory is too neat a word for what I felt. There was satisfaction, certainly, the sharp pleasure in seeing a liar held accountable, but there was also a profound sadness for the years stolen by deception. That sadness is lighter now. It no longer defines me. Instead, it is a teacher, a signpost that points away from what I once tolerated. In the months that followed, Daniel faded from my daily life. He resurfaced on social media occasionally, carefully curated images, new beginnings, a man who seemed to be learning to exist with less. Sometimes I scrolled past and felt the old outrage flare, but mostly I felt empathy. People are complicated. Cruelty is not always the full measure of a person. That didn't excuse him. It only made his downfall less satisfying in a simple way. There is a day I remember most clearly. It was the first wedding invitation I received after my divorce, from a distant cousin. I sat looking at the elegant font, and felt my chest expand with a kind of freedom that had nothing to do with celebration, and everything to do with ownership of my own story. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that was truly mine, one built on honesty, on people who would not see me as an opportunity or an asset, but as someone worthy of simple truth. The final piece of my revenge, and perhaps the most meaningful, was the work I did afterward to help Claire and others who had been caught in similar traps. We volunteered at a local support group for people recovering from relationship deception. There, in cooled rooms with coffee rings on tables and fluorescent lights that were mercilessly real, we helped people untangle the threads of their lives. It felt like giving back more than it felt like punishment. One evening, months later, Claire and I sat on a bench overlooking the city as the sun drained into the horizon. We talked about small things, work, books, the way the world kept moving even after the most seismic ruptures. She reached out and squeezed my hand, a quiet, steady pressure that said more than any words. "Thank you," she said simply. For what, I asked, though I already knew. For being honest, for being brave, for not letting him finish the story he'd started for us. I thought about telling her that revenge had not healed everything. That some nights, certain songs still dragged the past up like a tide. But I didn't. Because right then, with the city lights blinking awake below us, the present felt real. The future felt like a map with clean lines rather than the jagged mess it had been. I had wanted him to feel humiliation and loss, and he had. But what I wanted even more was to reclaim my life and to prove to myself that I could survive betrayal and emerge with my dignity intact. I had learned to listen to that inner voice that had told me not to confront him in a clumsy, emotional way the night I first heard him on the recording. That voice had taught me patience, strategy, and the strength to use truth as a weapon. It's been a long road, and sometimes I still wake with the echo of his voice like a burr under my skin. But those moments are fewer now. They're surprise visitors rather than permanent residents. I remarried, not to a man I needed to rescue me from my own loneliness, but to someone who admired my resilience and matched my capacity for honesty. We didn't have a big wedding. Instead, we had a small backyard ceremony with people who had proven, in ways both small and large, that they'd been honest. There is one memory I keep close, the moment I played the recording for Claire and watched her face shift from confusion to heartbreak to rage to a calm resolve that matched my own. In that moment, I realized that the weapon of truth is blunt and terrible and the only one that matters. Lies can be spun into stories for a while, but truth has weight. It settles. It finds its level. If revenge had a shape for me, it wasn't messy or theatrical. It was a slow, strategic return to myself, a careful reassembly of a life that had been partly stolen. It was the courage to speak when silence would have been safer and to listen when anger threatened to overwhelm me. It was forming an alliance with the person who could have been my rival and choosing solidarity instead. I don't carry a ledger anymore. I keep photographs not as trophies, but as reminders of how steady I can be when the ground shifts. I remain vigilant, perhaps wiser, certainly more protective of my center, but mostly I feel unburdened. The man who once plotted weddings as currency now occupies a small, diminished corner of my history. I have the strange, clean feeling of someone who has closed a book that once consumed her and opened a new one where the margins are mine to write in. And when, on rare nights, the old anger rises to the surface, I let it. I breathe through it and then return to the abundance of the life I have chosen, not the one someone else planned for me. That is my final victory, not the ruin I engineered for him, but the life I reclaimed with the same patience and carefulness I used to dismantle his lies. It is proof that even when someone you love becomes your greatest betrayer, you can still build something honest from the ruins.